My parents hadn't answered my calls for a week. When I finally went to their house, the place was a wreck. I was just about to call the cops when I heard a noise coming from the closet. My heart stopped. Inside was. The silence was the first sign, a chilling quiet that screamed louder than any alarm. It hinted at a horror far beyond my worst nightmares, a betrayal so profound it would forever scar my soul and shatter everything I thought I knew about family. Hey, I'm Jackson Palmer. I'm 31, and I manage a hotel here in Las Vegas. You know, the city of fleeting dreams and bright lights. On the surface, my life looks pretty solid. Good job, decent apartment, a schedule packed enough to keep me from overthinking. But if you dig a little deeper, if you ask me about my family, about where I grew up back in Reno, that's when you hit a different story. A story riddled with cracks, old pain, and a love that's become incredibly difficult to express. I grew up in Reno, a small town tucked away in the Nevada mountains. It's one of those places where everyone knows everyone and life just moves slower. My parents, Joseph and Marilyn, were exactly what you'd expect. Hardworking, simple, pillars of the community. From a young age, I basically grew up behind the counter of our small grocery store. I'd bag groceries, restock cans of soup, whatever needed doing. It was a modest, worn-out place with a faded wooden sign, always smelling of fresh bread mixed with that comforting, musty scent of old wood floors. I loved that store. Not because it was fancy or grand, but because back then, it was my entire world. Our house was just a few blocks from the store, a two-story place with a perpetually weedy front yard and this ancient oak tree I practically lived in every summer. That's where I learned to tie my shoes, where my mom sang me lullabies, where I saw both my parents' happiest smiles and their quiet tears. But don't get it twisted, we weren't some perfectly happy family, not by a long shot. Even with all the warmth, our family always lived under a shadow. A shadow named Dylan, my younger brother. Dylan was 5 years younger than me, but from the moment he could walk, he was the absolute center of our universe. My mom practically worshipped him, calling him her golden boy with his curly hair and those sparkling eyes. Dylan had this smile, you know? The kind that could just melt anyone. My parents, especially my mother, were completely wrapped around his finger. They spoiled him rotten. New toys, nice clothes, endless forgiveness for every single mistake. Me, the older brother? I was expected to be the mature, responsible one. Dylan, though, he got to live this completely carefree life, as if his screw-ups were just charming little pranks. I don't blame my parents, not really. I know they loved us both, just differently. I can still picture those evenings at the store, me, staying late to clean up, while Mom would take Dylan out for ice cream. Or the times I'd get absolutely chewed out for breaking a glass, but Dylan? He could spill an entire tray of pastries, and Mom would just give him a soft pat on the head. It was all those tiny things, piling up year after year, that drove a wedge between us. Dylan and I, we grew up like parallel lines. We lived under the same roof, but we never truly connected. When I turned 18, I practically fled Reno for college in Las Vegas. It was the first time I felt like I could genuinely breathe, like I could actually live for myself. I studied business, landed a solid job at a hotel, and piece by piece, I built a new life. But every single time I went back home, this suffocating heaviness would settle over me. Dylan, now a teenager, was changing, and not for the better. That angelic smile from his childhood? It was gone, replaced by defiance and a reckless glint in his eyes. He started skipping school, running with a bad crowd. And then, like an inevitable, devastating storm, he spiraled into gambling. Now, gambling in Nevada, it's not exactly rare. It's everywhere, from the slot machines in grocery stores to the glitzy casinos. But for Dylan, it wasn't just a casual thing. It was an addiction, a monster that quickly consumed him. I'll never forget the first call from my mom. Her voice was trembling, barely a whisper, as she told me Dylan had stolen money right out of the store's safe to feed his habit. I drove back that same night, only to find my dad sitting in his armchair, silent, utterly broken, and my mother sobbing uncontrollably in the kitchen. Dylan? He just shrugged. I'll pay it back. No big deal, he said, as if it were a minor inconvenience. But I knew. I knew then he never would. And he never did. The debts just kept piling up, dragging Dylan deeper and deeper into his abyss. He even married a woman named Sutton, and for a fleeting moment, I actually hoped she might be the one to pull him out. But their marriage lasted less than 2 years. Sutton left, leaving Dylan and their tiny son, Jaden, who was just 3. Did Dylan step up? Of course not. He abandoned Jaden, leaving him with my already exhausted parents, while Dylan himself just drifted like a restless gust of wind. He'd show up occasionally, always to beg for money, stir up trouble, and then vanish again. Jaden, now 6 years old, became the one pure, unwavering light in our increasingly fractured family. Every time I visited Reno, I made sure to spend time with him, telling him stories or just sitting on the porch, watching cars go by. He had those same big eyes Dylan once had as a child, but Jaden's were infinitely more innocent, more pure. He called me Uncle Jack and would hug me so tightly when I had to leave, it almost broke my heart. But even Jaden, as precious as he was, couldn't bridge the growing chasm between me and my parents. Our relationship had been fractured for years. It wasn't that I didn't love them. I did, profoundly, but their relentless favoritism towards Dylan and the way they dumped every single one of his messes onto me had just worn me down. Every time my mother's name popped up on my phone, I'd brace myself. Another rant about Dylan. Another debt. Another wave of trouble. And each time, I'd hang up feeling completely drained, utterly helpless. Last month, Mom's calls became more frequent, her voice frail and laced with worry. Dylan came by again, she'd whisper. He demanded money and brought some strangers with him. I don't know what to do. I told her, begged her, to call the police if Dylan was causing trouble, but she just sighed, a sound of resigned despair. He's my son. I can't do that. I hung up, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. I knew she wouldn't do anything. She never did. I considered going back to Reno, confronting Dylan face to face, or even bringing Jaden to live with me in Vegas. But work swept me away. I rationalized, told myself everything would be fine, that my parents could handle it. I was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. Then came the silence. For an entire week, this gnawing sense of unease crept into my heart, like a cold, alien wind blowing through the scorching Las Vegas summer. It started with unanswered calls. I called Mom, then Dad, over and over, but all I heard was that endless, empty ringing, as if their phones were just echoing in a void. I sent text after text, Mom, are you okay? Dad, what are you up to? How's Jaden doing? But my screen remained stubbornly blank. Not a single reply. At first, I tried to brush it off, telling myself they were just busy at the store, or maybe their phones had died. But as the 3rd day bled into the 5th, that unease wasn't a fleeting breeze anymore. It had become a full-blown storm, raging inside my chest. I fought hard not to overthink it, but every night, as the neon glow of Vegas pulsed outside my window, I'd find myself clutching my phone, endlessly scrolling through those unanswered messages, my heart heavy with a weight I couldn't shake. I pictured my dad, tall, lean, his eyes always holding that quiet exhaustion, but also a bedrock of patience. My mom, her gentle smile, but a voice that grew fainter, more defeated, every time Dylan's name came up. And then Jaden, my sweet 6-year-old nephew, with those big, round eyes, probably tucked away in that Reno house, clutching his worn-out teddy bear. What was happening? Were they okay? Mom's last calls about Dylan's relentless disruptions showing up with those strangers had left me with a gnawing, sickening dread. Dylan wasn't just asking for money anymore. He'd changed. He was aggressive, reckless, a live wire. Mom told me he'd show up at all hours, sometimes in the dead of night, pounding on their door, screaming for money to pay off his debts. Once, she even mentioned he threatened to make a big deal if they didn't comply. I wanted to race back to Reno right then, grab Dylan by the collar and scream in his face that he had absolutely no right to torment our parents like this. But I held myself back. You can't keep cleaning up his messes forever, Jackson, I told myself. I was wrong. My biggest mistake wasn't staying away, it was thinking I could stay on the sidelines, that I could ever let my parents face the storm named Dylan alone. On the seventh day, with still no word from my parents, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. My heart leaped into my throat. It was Mrs. Helen, the neighbor who lived across from my parents' grocery store. Her voice was frantic, laced with raw worry. Jackson, I need to tell you something. Your parents' store has been closed all week. No one's seen them. I've tried calling, but no one picks up. Something's not right, Jackson. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. That grocery store, the place my parents had poured their entire lives into, had never been closed for more than 2 days, not unless it was a major holiday. For it to be shuttered for a whole week? Unimaginable. I hung up, my hands trembling, trying desperately to piece my thoughts together. Maybe they were sick. Maybe they'd gone on a spontaneous trip. But deep down, I knew those were just flimsy excuses I was trying to soothe myself with. Dylan. Had he done something? Had he finally pushed my parents into a situation they couldn't escape? I couldn't sit still a second longer. That evening, I called my boss, asking for emergency leave. I need to go home, I choked out, my voice thick with emotion. It's urgent. He's a kind man, though perpetually busy, and he simply nodded over the phone, telling me to be careful. I threw a few clothes into a small suitcase. Before I left my apartment, I glanced out the window at the Las Vegas lights, twinkling as if oblivious to the terrifying storm raging inside me. 7 grueling hours of driving from Vegas to Reno lay ahead. And I knew, deep down, this trip wasn't just about finding my parents. It was about finally facing everything I'd been avoiding for years. As I started the engine and began the long drive, childhood memories flooded my mind, vivid as if they'd happened yesterday. Afternoons behind the store counter, Dad patiently teaching me to count change. Mom slipping a peppermint candy into my hand. The familiar scent of old wooden floors, the cheerful jingle of the bell when customers came in. Dylan and I, just kids, playing tag between the aisles, laughing until Mom pretended to scold us. But those warm memories, they couldn't cut through the dread suffocating my chest. Every dark stretch of road, I saw Dylan's face, not the boy I remembered, but the man he'd become, cold eyes, harsh voice, the threats Mom had whispered. What had happened in that house? Were my parents truly okay, or was something far, far worse waiting for me in Reno? With every passing mile, my fear grew, a heavy stone in my heart. I tried the radio, desperate for a song to drown out the silence, but no melody could quiet the relentless whisper in my head. Jackson, you've abandoned them for too long. I pressed the gas pedal harder, speeding towards Reno, towards the house that held both my childhood and my deepest wounds. That 7-hour drive felt like an eternity. When Reno's welcome sign finally appeared, my chest tightened, a vice-like grip squeezing the air from my lungs. The town looked the same, familiar streets and houses bathed in moonlight. But something felt profoundly wrong, as if the very air carried a warning. I drove straight to my parents' grocery store, a place I always imagined would be buzzing with life and laughter. What I saw made my blood run cold. The store was completely shuttered, dark and desolate. The faded wooden sign, Palmer's Grocery, still hung, but it was tilted, weary, as if it too bore witness to something terrible. Through the window, I saw only blackness, no light, no hint of life. The shelves I'd meticulously stocked were swallowed by shadows. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I fought to take deep, steadying breaths to keep from spiraling into a full-blown panic. My parents would never close the store for this long. Never. Unless. I didn't dare finish that thought. I started the car again, driving the few blocks to their house. The familiar road that once led me through carefree summer days now felt endless. Every street corner, every old oak tree, stirred up memories, Dylan and me running wild, Mom calling us in for dinner, Dad reading his newspaper. But now those memories only deepened my crushing unease. I didn't want to know what I was about to face. This terrible premonition clung to me like a shroud. I couldn't shake it. As I pulled up to the familiar 2-story house, my heart simply stopped. The house was utterly black, Not a single light, not a sound. The front door stood slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a desperate hurry. I stepped out of the car, my legs heavy as lead, each step feeling like it was dragging me towards an abyss. Dad? Mom? Jaden. I called out, my voice thin and reedy, but only the cold, lifeless wind answered. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The sight that met me was a brutal punch to the chest. This house, once bursting with laughter, the scent of Mom's cookies, and Jaden's happy babbling, was now a wreck. Furniture in the living room was toppled, as if a hurricane had ripped through it. Kitchen cabinet doors hung open, dishes were scattered across the floor, some shattered into dangerous fragments. A long, jagged crack scarred the wall, as if something had been slammed into it with incredible force. Dad's proudly built wooden chair lay broken, a leg snapped off. Everything screamed chaos, screamed that this house had witnessed a violent battle. I stood in the living room, feeling the blood in my veins turn to ice. Dad? Mom? I called again, my voice barely a whisper, but the thick silence swallowed me whole, pressing down on my chest like a heavy blanket. I took a step, tripping over a spoon, and each movement felt like a knife twisting in my heart. I knew, with a terrible certainty, that no one would leave the house like this by accident. Not Dad, who kept everything in meticulous order. Not Mom, who polished the floors until they gleamed. And certainly not Jaden, the careful little boy who cherished everything around him. I tried desperately to gather my thoughts, to find any rational explanation. Maybe they'd been robbed. Maybe they'd fled in a panic. Or maybe something far worse had happened to them, something I didn't dare imagine. I shook my head, trying to banish the horrifying thought. I just needed to find my parents. To find Jaden. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over 911. But then, a faint sound. From the end of the hallway. My parents' bedroom. A shaky, labored breath, mixed with soft, stifled sobs, like a tiny, wounded animal trying to hide. My heart hammered, blood rushing in my ears. I froze, straining to hear, convinced I was imagining things. But then it came again, clearer this time, more desperate. I moved towards the bedroom, my legs trembling. The door was slightly ajar. As I pushed it open, a wave of musty air and chilling silence washed over me. My parents' bed was untouched, but the blankets were disheveled, as if someone had been there, leaving in a frantic rush. Jaden. I called out, my voice breaking. Is that you? Where are you? No reply. Only that labored breathing, now unmistakably clear, coming from the corner of the room. I followed the sound, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. The breathing led me to the old wooden wardrobe, its door slightly ajar. My hand shook uncontrollably as I reached for the handle, sweat beading on my forehead. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady myself, but fear clung to me, relentless. It's going to be okay, Jackson, I whispered, trying to reassure myself, just open the door. But deep down, I knew nothing was okay. The wardrobe door creaked, a sharp, piercing sound that sliced through the room's terrible silence. The darkness inside swallowed the faint hallway light. And then, amidst the jumble of hanging clothes and the musty scent of old wood, I saw a tiny figure curled up in the corner. My eyes strained to adjust, and when the light finally fell on him, I froze. It was Jaden, my sweet, 6-year-old nephew. Those clear, innocent eyes I cherished were now unrecognizable. He sat huddled, clutching his tattered teddy bear, the one Mom had given him when he was a baby. His clothes were crumpled, filthy, as if he'd been wearing them for a week. His hair was matted to his forehead, and his face was gaunt, impossibly pale, as if hunger had drained every last drop of life from him. But what truly shattered my heart were his eyes, red-rimmed, wide, gleaming with a raw, primal fear I'd never seen in a child. He wasn't crying loudly, just soft, choked sobs, as if he'd cried so much, he had no strength left. Jaden. I called, my voice breaking, barely recognizable to myself. I knelt down, reaching out to touch him, but he flinched, shrinking deeper into the corner, as if I were a threat. He clutched that teddy bear so tightly, I worried it might tear. "It's Uncle Jack, buddy," I said, my voice trembling, forcing myself to stay calm, even though my heart was screaming. "You're safe now." But Jaden didn't respond. He just stared at me, his panicked eyes searching for something, anything, to trust. Slowly, I reached out again, gently touching his shoulder this time. He didn't pull away, but his small body shook violently, like a dry leaf caught in a cold wind. "What happened? Where are Grandma and Grandpa?" I asked, my voice catching, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. I needed to know. I needed to understand why the house was in ruins, why my parents weren't here, and why Jaden was hiding in a wardrobe like a wounded animal. But Jaden said nothing. He just stared, his red eyes wide, unblinking. And then, as if his last bit of strength had given out, he collapsed into my arms. His small body felt impossibly weightless, so frail. I was terrified a tight hug might break him. I held him close, feeling his rapid, shallow breaths against my shoulder, and in that moment, a pain deeper than anything I'd ever known washed over me. This boy, my beloved nephew, had endured something horrific. And I, the one who should have protected him, hadn't been there when he needed me most. I lifted Jaden, his tiny body limp in my arms. "It's okay," I whispered, my voice rough, "I'm here now." I wasn't sure if I was comforting him or myself. I scanned the room again, desperate for any sign of my parents, a note, a clue, anything. But there was only silence and the wreckage. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like an abandoned battlefield. I couldn't stay there another second. Jaden needed help, and I had to get him out. I carried him to the car, gently laid him on the back seat, and wrapped him in a thin blanket I'd found on the couch. His eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling faintly, as if he were barely clinging to life. I jumped into the driver's seat, started the car, and sped towards the nearest hospital, my heart pounding like a drum in my ears. The 10-minute drive felt like a century. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, terrified he might just slip away. "Hang on, buddy," I muttered, my voice breaking. "I won't let anything happen to you." But in my mind, questions swirled like sharp blades. Where were my parents? What the hell had happened in that house? When I finally pulled up to the emergency room, I practically screamed for the nurses. "My nephew. He's not okay." A team of doctors and nurses rushed over, wheeling a stretcher to the car. They gently lifted Jaden onto it, and I stood there, utterly helpless, as they whisked him inside. A nurse, her eyes filled with professional concern, asked about Jaden's condition. I could only shake my head, unable to form a clear answer. I don't know. I just found him in a wardrobe. He hasn't said anything. Please, just save him." Inside the emergency room, the doctors worked swiftly. They hooked Jaden up to N4, checked his heart rate, measured his blood pressure, while I stood in the hallway, peering through the small window in the door. Jaden lay there, so small, so fragile, like a bird with broken wings. A doctor emerged, his face grave. "The boy is severely dehydrated and malnourished, likely from days without food or water," he said. "He's also experiencing significant psychological trauma. We'll keep him here for observation. But can you tell us anything about what happened?" I shook my head, overwhelmed by a crushing helplessness. "I don't know," I whispered. "I just got home and found him like that." Deep down, I knew I couldn't stop here. Jaden had survived. But what about my parents? The wrecked house. The chilling signs of violence. The eerie silence. I clenched my fists, anger and pain surging through me like a wildfire. I had to go back to that house. I stood in the hospital hallway, peering through the small window into the emergency room where Jaden lay. He looked heartbreakingly small, for tubes taped to his arm, his face still etched with the ghost of fear. The doctor had said he'd be okay, but in that moment, okay, felt like a hollow, empty word. I turned away, unable to bear the sight for another second. I had to act. I had to find my parents. I called a friend from the hotel, asking him to cover my shifts for a few days. "I don't know how long this will take," I said, my voice hollow, raw. He didn't ask questions. He just told me to take care of myself and promise to handle everything. I hung up, feeling as though I was severing the last thread of my normal life in Las Vegas, stepping headfirst into a nightmare with no end in sight. Back in the car, I drove straight to my parents' house. The Reno night was cold, and the faint moonlight cast an eerie glow on the familiar streets, making them feel utterly alien. When I pulled up, a shiver crawled down my spine. I stepped inside, careful not to touch a single thing. The house was exactly as I'd left it, furniture toppled, dishes shattered, that menacing crack on the wall, a grim, silent reminder of whatever horror had played out here. I stood in the living room, breathing in the heavy, dead air, desperate for any clue, any sign that could help me understand what had happened to my parents. I moved through each room, checking every corner, meticulously avoiding touching anything. I knew that if something truly serious had occurred, the police would need the scene completely untouched. In the kitchen, I spotted a family photo frame lying on the floor. I looked down at the cracked glass, my heart clenching at the sight of my parents' smiles, mine, even Dylan's from when we were kids. The photo was taken on a summer day, a time when we were still a family, before everything shattered. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed 911. "I need to report a missing persons case," I managed when the dispatcher's voice came through. "My parents, they're not home. And my nephew, I found him in critical condition. The house, it's been ransacked. Please come quickly." My voice choked. Each word felt like it was being ripped from deep inside my chest. The dispatcher asked basic questions: address, my parents' names, the state of the scene. I answered mechanically, my mind numb. They told me to wait, that officers would be there soon. I sank onto the old sofa, trying to stay calm, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I scanned the room, desperate for any small detail. Dad's jacket still hung on the coat rack, but its pockets were empty. In the kitchen, a cold cup of coffee sat on the table, as if he'd just left it mid-sip. Everything in that house seemed to tell a story, but I couldn't for the life of me decipher what it was saying. About 15 minutes later, the red and blue lights of a patrol car flashed outside, painting the quiet street with an eerie glow. I heard the car stop, hurried footsteps approaching, and then the front door swung open. 3 uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by a man in plain clothes, a detective, I assumed. "Are you the one who called?" "Jackson Palmer," the man asked, his voice low and steady. I nodded, standing, trying desperately to keep my own voice from trembling. "I'm Detective Matthew. Tell us what you know." I led them through the wreckage, pointing out the broken chairs, the shattered dishes, the jagged crack on the wall. I recounted everything, not being able to reach my parents for a week, Mrs. Helen's frantic call, and, finally, finding Jaden in the wardrobe. Each word felt like a fresh stab, but I forced myself to continue. Matthew took notes meticulously, his eyes sharp but non-judgmental. "We'll look into everything," he said, "but first, we need to secure the scene." The officers began stringing yellow tape around the house, keeping anyone from getting too close. I stood on the porch, watching as neighbors started to gather, their eyes a mix of morbid curiosity and genuine concern. Whispers floated through the crowd, and I caught fragments. I heard arguing last week. An elderly woman, Mrs. Carter, told an officer. Loud shouting from inside the house. I thought it was Joseph and Marilyn arguing with someone. Another man, Mr. Thompson, chimed in, "I saw Dylan around here a few times. He was with some rough-looking guys once. I even saw them standing outside the store, like they were watching something." Each word hit me like a hammer blow to the chest. I was a storm of fury and desperation. Dylan. His name kept coming up, a sinister refrain in this unfolding tragedy. I wanted to scream, to demand answers from every neighbor about what they'd seen or heard. But I knew I had to stay calm. The police needed me clear-headed. And Jaden. Jaden needed me strong. Still, deep inside, a fear was growing, snarling like a caged beast. If Dylan was involved, if he had truly done something to my parents, I didn't know how I'd face that truth. Matthew called me over, asking more questions about Dylan, where he usually went, his habits, anything that could help. I told him everything I knew, though each word felt like rubbing salt in an open wound. "He's addicted to gambling," I said. "He shows up to ask for money. Mom always forgave him, no matter how much he hurt her. Matthew nodded, his eyes fixed on his notebook. "We'll start looking into this angle," he said. "But you should prepare yourself. This might not be a simple missing persons case." His words sent a shiver straight through me. I desperately wanted to believe my parents were okay, that they'd just gone somewhere, that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the brutal truth was waiting, and it wouldn't be easy. I turned away, my steps heavy, heading back to the hospital where Jaden was. I needed to be with him. I hurried back into the hospital, rushing straight to Jaden's bedside. The doctors had been giving him 4 fluids for hours, and he looked slightly better. His skin wasn't that deathly pale shade from when I found him, but his eyes, they still held a haunting shadow I knew I'd never forget. I stood by the bed, watching him, my heart feeling like it was being crushed. "It's Uncle Jack, buddy," I whispered, gently touching his hand. "You're okay now." Jaden slowly opened his eyes, those big, round, red-rimmed eyes locking onto mine. Then, as if a dam of terror had finally broken, he burst into wrenching sobs. His cries were raw, desperate, as if he'd been holding them in for far too long. He reached out with his small hands, clinging to me, his tiny fingers gripping my shirt, as if afraid I'd vanish. "Uncle Jax, don't go," he whispered, his voice trembling, faint, so fragile I had to fight my own tears. I pulled him into my arms, feeling his tiny body shake uncontrollably against me. "I'm right here, Jaden," I said, my voice catching. "I'm not going anywhere." But deep down, I knew I was making a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. A doctor came in to check on Jaden. "He's more stable now," she said, her tone gentle but serious, "but he's suffered severe psychological trauma. We need time to assess him further, and it's best not to pressure him right now." I nodded, but my mind was swirling with desperate questions. Jaden knew something. He'd been in that house. He'd seen something. And as much as I hated to push him, I needed the truth. Detective Matthew arrived at the hospital shortly after, accompanied by a female officer whose eyes were kind but cautious. They asked me a few brief questions about Jaden's condition, then requested to speak with him. "We'll be as gentle as possible," Matthew said. "I know it's not the best time, but anything the boy can tell us might help find your parents." I looked at Jaden, still clinging to me, and felt like I was standing at a dangerous crossroads. I didn't want him to relive whatever horror had happened, but I also knew it was the only way to find my parents. "Jaden," I said, kneeling by the bed, keeping my voice as soft as possible, "can you help Uncle Jack a little? These people are police officers, and they want to find Grandma and Grandpa. Can you tell us what happened?" Jaden shook his head frantically, his eyes wide with terror. He clutched his teddy bear tightly, as if it were his last shield. "No, I don't want to," he whispered, his voice quivering. I hugged him, letting him rest his head on my shoulder. "I'm right here, Jaden. You don't have to be scared. Just tell us what you remember. It's okay. I won't let anyone hurt you." I could feel his rapid, shallow breathing, and in that moment, I wanted nothing more than to snatch him away from all this pain. But I couldn't. I needed the truth, no matter how brutal. After a few agonizing minutes of my reassurance, Jaden finally began to speak, his voice halting, punctuated by heart-wrenching sobs. "Dad. Dad came to the house," he whispered, and my own heart seemed to stop cold. "Dad came with some other people. They were yelling. Grandma and Grandpa yelled back." Jaden paused, his eyes wide, as if reliving every terrifying second. I squeezed his hand, trying to keep my voice steady. "Go on, buddy. What did they do?" Jaden trembled, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Dad, he was really mad. He shouted. Told Grandma and Grandpa to give him money, but they wouldn't. Then there was a loud crash. Things broke." He stopped, clutching the teddy bear, his small body shaking violently. I was scared. I ran to the wardrobe. I hid. His voice faded, sinking into a memory too heavy to bear. I heard Grandma and Grandpa cry out. Then everything went quiet. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. I held Jaden tightly, fighting back my own tears. But inside, a furious storm raged. Dylan. He was there. He fought with our parents. And the sounds Jaden heard. I didn't dare think further. Matthew and the female officer took notes quickly, their expressions hardening with every word. "Do you remember anything about the people with your dad?" the officer asked, her voice gentle but careful. Jaden shook his head, tears spilling again. "I don't know. They were tall. They were scary. Covered in tattoos." He broke into wrenching sobs, clinging to me. I knew he couldn't say another word. I signaled to Matthew and he nodded, standing up. "Thank you, Jaden," he said, his voice firm but kind. "You're a very brave boy. We have enough to start the investigation. Dylan will be our primary suspect." The doctor stepped in gently, asking everyone to leave so Jaden could rest. "The boy needs time," she said. "He's been through too much." I nodded, but inside, I wanted to scream. Dylan, my brother, what had he done? What had he dragged our parents into? And Jaden, an innocent child, had witnessed it all. I sat by Jaden's bed, holding his small hand until he finally drifted off to sleep, his breathing evening out. But I couldn't rest. Jaden's fragmented words were like a sharp, chilling puzzle piece, snapping into place and confirming my worst fears. Dylan hadn't just caused trouble. He might have done something unforgivable. Detective Matthew called me the next morning, his voice low and resolute. "We've designated Dylan as the primary suspect based on Jaden's statement," he said. "We're issuing a manhunt and checking every place he might show up. Do you have any more information about your brother's habits?" I recounted everything I knew, the casinos Dylan frequented, the dive bars where he drank away his money. Each word felt like a fresh stab, but I couldn't stop. The police moved quickly. They went to the rundown motel room Dylan rented on the outskirts of Reno. But when Matthew called with an update, his voice was heavy with frustration. "The room was empty," he said. "Trash strewn everywhere, clothes scattered like he left in a hurry. We're collecting fingerprints and any clues we can find." I pictured it, a chaotic mess reeking of alcohol and stale cigarettes, a perfect reflection of the broken person Dylan had become. He'd fled. He knew what he'd done, and he was trying to escape. Meanwhile, I sat by Jaden's side, watching him sleep, his face still etched with that terrible fear. The doctor said he needed time to recover, but every time he startled in his sleep, muttering incoherent words, it felt like someone was squeezing my heart. I stroked his hair, whispering, "I'm here, Jaden. Everything's going to be okay." But I wasn't sure if I was comforting him or myself. The brutal truth was, I didn't know if things would ever be okay again. The police relentlessly tracked Dylan's trail, visiting every casino and bar in Reno where he was a regular. A bartender at the Rusty Nail told Matthew that Dylan had shown up a few days ago, frantic, downing drinks, muttering about needing money fast. He looked like he was being hunted, the bartender said, bloodshot eyes, constantly looking over his shoulder, like he was scared of someone following him. Then he'd vanished without paying. Those details sent a deep chill through me. Dylan wasn't just running, he was terrified. A crucial lead came from a creditor named Eddie, a man the police tracked down at a small casino. Eddie, with a gravelly voice and cold eyes, explained that Dylan owed him tens of thousands from losing streaks. "He begged me for more time," Eddie recounted to Matthew later. "Said he was about to come into big money to pay it all off. Mentioned something about family taking care of it, but I didn't buy it. He looked like a desperate dog." Eddie's words hit me like a hammer. Family taking care of it. What did Dylan mean? Was he planning to squeeze money from our parents, from the grocery store, or something far, far worse? The police issued a citywide manhunt for Dylan, extending it to surrounding areas, sending alerts to checkpoints, casinos, and every cheap motel. News of the case spread like wildfire through our usually quiet town. Neighbors gathered outside my parents' house, whispering, their eyes a mix of pity and curiosity. Mrs. Carter, our elderly neighbor, even visited Jaden and me at the hospital, bringing a tin of homemade cookies. "I can't believe this, Jackson," she said, her voice trembling. Joseph and Marilyn were good people. And Dylan. I saw him with some shady characters. I was worried, but I never thought it would come to this. Her words only fueled the raging fire in my chest. I wanted to scream that I didn't want to believe it, that I couldn't fathom my own brother doing something so horrific to our parents. But the pieces were falling into place, a gruesome mosaic. Jaden's account, the wrecked house, the neighbors' stories, and now Eddie's chilling words. They all pointed to Dylan like arrows aimed straight at my heart. I sat by Jaden, holding his hand, feeling his small, cold fingers in my palm. He was still sleeping, but his sleep was restless, filled with whimpers. Occasionally, he'd mumble words like, "Dad, don't," or "I'm scared." Each whisper cut into me like a blade. I thought about the years Dylan was coddled, defended by Mom, forgiven by Dad. I thought about the times I tried to pull him out of his messes, only for him to smirk and say, "Worry about yourself, Jax. I know how to live my life." Now his way of living had led to this, a destroyed home, a traumatized child, and our parents missing. I looked out the hospital window at the moonlight illuminating Reno's rooftops. Somewhere out there, Dylan was hiding, carrying secrets I both yearned and dreaded to uncover. I hoped the police would find him, drag him out of the shadows to face what he'd done. But at the same time, I feared that moment when I finally faced Dylan. What would I see? A criminal? A brother? Or a monster who had utterly destroyed our family? Matthew called again late that night, his voice firm, steady, but with an underlying tension. "We're narrowing it down," he said. "We got new leads from the outskirts. We'll find him soon." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Thank you," I managed, my voice hollow. I wasn't sure if I was truly ready to face Dylan or not. The next morning, Matthew called me back to the house. "Some findings from the investigation team. We need you to confirm a few details," he said over the phone. His voice carried an odd tone, as if he were bracing himself for something truly grave. I didn't ask questions. I just drove over, my heart pounding in my chest. When I stepped inside, Matthew was in the living room with another officer, meticulously taking photos of the scene. The house remained as I remembered it, a cold, wrecked wound that refused to heal. "We've done a more thorough search," Matthew said, leading me to the corner where Dad used to work at his old desk. "We found this in the drawer," Matthew said, handing me a faded yellow envelope, its edges worn soft with age. My hands trembled as I took it. My name was scrawled across it in Dad's handwriting, a script I'd recognize anywhere. "Jackson," it read, and just seeing it sent a chill straight down my spine. I opened the envelope, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was shaky, as if written in utter panic or profound fear. I took a deep, fortifying breath, trying to steel myself, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to read. "Jackson, our son," the letter began. "If you're reading this, things have probably gone too far. We're sorry for everything. We were wrong. So very wrong to let Dylan become what he is. We loved him, but we spoiled him too much, letting him grow into a selfish, broken man. We tried to fix it, but it might be too late." I stopped, feeling like I couldn't breathe. The words cut like a sharp, unrelenting knife. I knew my parents had always defended Dylan, forgiven his endless mistakes, but hearing them admit their culpability in their own handwriting filled me with both profound pain and a searing anger. I forced myself to read on, each line slicing deeper. "Dylan has changed, Jackson. He's no longer the boy we knew. Lately, he's been coming to the house, often demanding money, threatening us. He talked about selling the grocery store, saying it was the only way to settle his debts. We refused, but he wouldn't stop. He brought strangers, men with cold eyes. We've been living in fear, Jackson. We're afraid of the day things go too far." Tears welled up, blurring the words on the page. I thought I was prepared for anything, but no, there was no way to brace myself for this. My parents had lived in terror, threatened by their own son, and they had chosen to keep it from me. A tidal wave of anger surged through me, at Dylan, at myself for my distance, and even at my parents for letting it come to this. The letter continued, Dad's handwriting growing heavier, more desperate, as if he knew time was running out. "We didn't want to drag you into this, Jackson. You've done so much for this family. Carried so much. We didn't want you to face Dylan, didn't want you caught up in this. But if you're reading this, we're probably gone. Take care of Jaden. He's innocent, and please forgive us if you can." I folded the letter, unable to read another word. Hot tears streamed down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. The words felt like a final testament, as if my parents had known a tragic end was coming. They'd been pushed to the absolute edge by their own son, and they'd chosen to protect me, no matter the cost. I gripped the letter, feeling it burn in my hand. Matthew stood beside me, his eyes softening, but he said nothing, as if knowing I needed time to process this unspeakable grief. "Dylan," I whispered, my voice breaking. His name now felt like a curse, an indelible stain. He had driven our parents to the brink, and I could no longer stand on the sidelines. I handed the letter to Matthew, my voice trembling. "Keep it. It's evidence." He nodded, carefully placing it in a clear plastic bag. But his eyes told me he understood this wasn't just evidence. It was a piece of my family's shattered tragedy. I returned to the hospital right after, unable to bear another second in that house of ghosts. Jaden was still sleeping, his face now a little less pale. The words of that letter echoed in my mind, each one a relentless reminder of my parents' mistakes and my own. I'd left them alone for too long, thinking distance would shield me from Dylan's escalating chaos. But now there was nowhere left to run. Dylan had destroyed our family, and I had to face him, no matter how brutal the truth. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. It was Matthew. His voice was curt, but I could hear the tension humming beneath it. "We found Dylan," he said. "He's at a cheap motel on the outskirts. We've taken him into custody. Would you like to come to the station?" My heart pounded, a sickening mix of relief and dread surging through me. They'd found him. I left Jaden at the hospital under the nurse's care, promising to return soon. He clutched my hand, his eyes still wide with panic, but I forced a smile, though it felt dry and strained. "I'll be back soon, Jaden," I said, ruffling his hair. But as I stepped out of that room, I felt like I was walking straight into the eye of a hurricane. The Reno police station, a stark, gray building in the heart of town, felt heavy with the stale scent of old coffee as Matthew met me at the entrance. His expression was stern, but exhaustion clung to his eyes. "He's in the interrogation room," he said, leading me through a narrow hallway. "He's rattled, but still denying everything. We need you here to confirm some details." I nodded, though every fiber of my being wanted to turn and run from this moment. But I couldn't. Not now. The interrogation room was small, sparse, with a metal table and stiff chairs. Dylan sat there, facing Matthew and another officer. I stood behind the one-way glass, watching him through a haze of cold pain. He looked haggard, a mere shadow of himself. His hair was disheveled, his shirt crumpled, and his bloodshot eyes screamed of days without sleep. In his hand was a small bag containing some cash and fake IDs, clear signs he'd planned to flee. But what truly chilled me were his eyes, panicked, yet still holding a spark of defiance, as if he still believed he could escape. Matthew began the interrogation, his voice calm but sharp, cutting through the silence. "Dylan, we know you were at your parents' house last week. We have statements from your son, from neighbors, and from a creditor. What did you do?" Dylan kept his head down, his hands clasped tightly, his mouth stubbornly set. "I just went to ask for money," he mumbled. "We argued, sure, but then I left. I didn't do anything." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms until they stung. He was lying. I knew it. Matthew knew it. The very air in the room seemed to know it. Matthew didn't flinch. He placed a stack of documents on the table, my parents' letter, photos of the wrecked house. "You sure about that, Dylan?" he asked, his voice cold as steel. "Jaden said you came with some men. He said you fought with your parents, and he heard things breaking, loud crashes. How do you explain that?" Dylan shifted in his seat, his eyes darting around. "The kid's making it up," he muttered, but his voice trembled, betraying him. Matthew pressed on, his tone growing sharper. "We also have a statement from Eddie, your creditor. He said you promised big money to pay off your debts. Where was that money coming from, Dylan? Your parents' store? Their house?" I stood behind the glass, feeling the ground crumble beneath me. Each of Matthew's words was a puzzle piece, forming a horrifying, undeniable picture. Dylan bowed his head, silent, but I could see his shoulders trembling. He was breaking. I both wanted to scream at him and run from what I was about to hear. Suddenly, Matthew's phone buzzed. He answered, his calm demeanor instantly replaced by a stark seriousness. The room fell silent as he nodded a few times, then hung up. Matthew stood, his voice dropping, each word heavy, like a hammer strike. "Dylan," he said, "I just got a call. The crime scene team found the bodies of Joseph and Marilyn Palmer in a vacant lot not far from their house. Both were brutally attacked. Evidence at the scene matches what we found in the house and Jaden's statement. Do you have anything left to deny?" The world stopped. Bodies. My parents. I gripped the chair's edge, my head spinning. Their letter, with its trembling words, now became an unbearable, prophetic truth. I wanted to scream, to shatter the glass and grab Dylan, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, tears streaming down my face without me even noticing. Dylan looked up, his face pale as death. "No, it wasn't," he stammered, but his voice faltered, as if he didn't even believe his own lie. Matthew didn't give him a chance. He slid photos of the crime scene across the table, images I knew I couldn't bear to see, but I knew they were real. "Anything else to say, Dylan?" Matthew asked, his voice now a razor's edge. Dylan broke down. His sobs echoed, raw and guttural, in the small room. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably. And then, as if his last strength had drained away, he confessed. I didn't mean to," he choked out, his voice breaking. "I just wanted money. I needed it to pay my debts, but they wouldn't give it to me. They yelled, called me a disgrace. I lost control. I hit them. I didn't know what I was doing until they were lying there, not moving. I felt my heart tear apart. Dylan, my brother, once Mom's golden boy, had beaten our parents to death." He continued, his voice trembling as if trying to justify his monstrous crime. I panicked. I called some guys from the casino. We buried them in the lot. I thought if no one knew, I could sell the store, the house, pay off my debts, and start over. The room was stunned. Matthew kept his face stoic, but I saw his hand tighten around his pen. The officer beside him shook her head, as if unable to believe it. And I just stood there, staring at Dylan through the glass. He was no longer my brother. He was the monster who killed our parents, left Jaden in terror, and destroyed everything our family had. I turned away, unable to look any longer. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them. Rage and grief burned together inside me, an unquenchable fire. I wanted to scream at Dylan, to demand why he could do this to his own family, but I knew no answer could ever ease this pain. Matthew stepped out, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Jackson," he said, his voice softer now. "We'll bring him to justice. And you should prepare to identify your parents' bodies at the morgue." I nodded faintly, my heart utterly empty. I didn't know how to face this loss. My parents were gone, brutally taken from me, and Dylan, the brother I once knew, was the one who had done it. Dylan's trial took place just a few weeks later. I didn't attend. I couldn't face his face, couldn't bear to hear his horrific confession again. Matthew updated me over the phone, his voice steady but laced with empathy. Dylan was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He would spend the rest of his days behind bars, paying for the monstrous crime he committed. But that sentence didn't bring my parents back. It didn't erase the terrifying memories Jaden carried, and it certainly didn't mend the gaping cracks in my heart. I arranged my parents' funeral on a quiet afternoon in Reno. The small church our family used to attend on weekends was packed with people, neighbors, friends, even regular customers from the grocery store. They came to pay their respects, bringing white chrysanthemums and heartfelt condolences. Mrs. Carter, our elderly neighbor, held my hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Joseph and Marilyn were good people, Jackson," she whispered. "They didn't deserve this." I could only nod, unable to speak, afraid that if I opened my mouth, I'd completely shatter. The funeral was somber, with only the gentle rustle of wind through the oak trees in the cemetery and the murmur of prayers breaking the silence. I stood before their graves, feeling like my entire world had collapsed. But I forced myself to be strong. For Jaden, After the funeral, I took Jaden to live with me. Before my parents' graves, I knelt, placing my hand on the cold headstones, and whispered, "I promise to take care of Jaden like my own son. I won't let him suffer anymore." The wind blew, carrying a strange sense, as if my parents were listening, smiling from somewhere far away. I took Jaden's hand, leading him away from the cemetery, and in that moment, I knew this was a promise I would keep at all costs. The first days in Las Vegas weren't easy. Jaden was still haunted by what had happened. He woke up crying every night, calling for his grandparents. I held him close, singing the lullabies Mom used to sing, even as my own voice cracked with tears. "I'm here, Jaden," I whispered. "I won't leave you alone." I spent every spare moment with him, playing, telling stories, trying desperately to bring some light back to his eyes, still shadowed by darkness. Slowly, with immense patience and love, Jaden began to smile again. His smiles were faint at first, but to me, they were like sunlight breaking through a long, dark storm. I decided to sell the grocery store and the house in Reno. Those places held too many painful memories. I couldn't keep them, couldn't let those memories continue to trap us. The money from the sales wasn't much, but it was enough to start a new life for Jaden and me. I moved us into a larger apartment in Las Vegas, with a room just for him, where I hung his drawings and carefully placed his worn teddy bear on the bed. In the months that followed, as Jaden and I settled into our new rhythm, I began to truly reflect on my family. My parents had made mistakes, yes, spoiling Dylan too much, letting him become selfish and broken. Their favoritism had left deep wounds, not just for me, but ultimately for them and Jaden too. But I also realized that despite our family's flaws and fractures, love and responsibility were the enduring foundation that had always, however tenuously, held us together. I learned a painful lesson. Blind indulgence and neglect can push a child down a destructive path, even to tragedy. But I also believed, with every fiber of my being, that with love and responsibility, I could save a life, Jaden's life. One evening, as the neon lights of Las Vegas lit up the sky, I held Jaden's hand, walking him down a bustling street. He pointed at the dancing lights, giggling at a fountain that changed colors. I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I felt a profound stillness in my heart. No more nightmares. No more echoes of Dylan's shouts. No more painful memories of Reno. Just me and Jaden, uncle and nephew, walking together under the bright, hopeful glow of this city. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Jaden would still have nights when he woke crying, and I would forever carry the scars of what Dylan did. But I was determined to build a new family for us. One without violence, without crippling favoritism, without betrayal. A family built purely on love, where Jaden could grow up without fear, where I could keep my promise to my parents and to myself. As we stopped by a fountain, Jaden looked up at me, his eyes sparkling. "Uncle Jax, can I stay with you forever?" he asked, his voice small but full of hope. I knelt down, hugged him tight, and smiled, though tears welled in my eyes. "Forever, Jaden," I said. "You and me. We're family now." Our story found its true beginning under the radiant lights of Las Vegas. And in my heart, there was only stillness and resolve. I would not let our family's tragedy repeat. I would give Jaden the life he deserved. And I would honor the true meaning of family, not through blind indulgence, but through unwavering love and responsibility. That was the legacy I wanted to leave, not just for Jaden, but for my parents, who loved us, however imperfectly.